Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm Jess, and if you're new, then welcome. I'd love to earn your subscription. Well, today we are in part 2 of the Bobby Baker scandal. And last time we got into this, I was having trouble believing how scandalous, how overt Life magazine was in calling out LBJ while he was the sitting vice president. And it made me begin to understand some of the things people have said, which is people suspected that RFK was feeding stories to Life magazine, and perhaps that this Bobby Baker scandal was at least a significant part, the timeliness of it was a significant part, if LBJ had a hand in any form of planning of the assassination of JFK. So I've wanted to look into this, but I had no idea what I was getting into, and I hope you'll find it as fascinating and riveting as I have. If you missed it, you definitely want to go back and see that first part because it sets up everything beautifully. And today we're going to be getting into a lot of the details and just what I've looked ahead, like they're going to be giving us names and that sort of thing. So before we get into the article, I just want to say, would you go ahead and like this video if you like it? Would you check that you are subscribed? And would you consider if you have somebody that you'd love to discuss these things with, if you want to share this video? So those are the things that I would say. And then before we get into the actual article, I wanted to show you guys, I was flipping through to try to find where the magazine begins, and the page before the article has Broadway spins along on work, hope, and a kiss for old time's sake. And as I read this headline, I'm just going to read the little caption for the photo and then show you guys the picture. And we're going to talk about it for just a minute because it's so indicative of a different era that I just kind of wanted to show you. It says, after her opening bow in Jenny, Mary Martin gets kissed for old time's sake by Richard Rogers, who wrote South Pacific, Sound of Music for her. Okay, so we have a leading actress who Rogers, like Rogers and Hammerstein Rogers, had written musicals for. So they're close, they've known each other a long time, but look at this kiss, okay? I think what's a congratulatory kiss, right? It's like, oh, yay! Or like the old British, just kiss the cheeks. Oh, I'm so proud of you. This is something different. Look at this. Her head is tilted back, and they got a close-up of that shot. I don't know. I just thought this was a little bit cuckoo. This is not the way I just kiss a congratulatory. I mean, I don't kiss anybody for a congratulatory moment, but if I was, it would be like a, yay, polite, friendly, cheerful, affectionate. And this is something different. I've never tilted my head back and dropped my shoulders for anybody. It just is very awkward to me. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments. Well, let's get into this article. I want to remind you, it says, the Bobby Baker case. U.S. Senate writhes as a nation focuses on a mess involving one of its own. In our last episode, we got through the entire first Life magazine about this scandal, which actually had it on the cover. And then this was the follow-up 2 weeks later. The initial Bobby Baker scandal headline, like front cover page story, was 2 weeks before JFK's assassination. This was the follow-up 2 weeks later, and it was printed on the day he was assassinated. So these details were coming out simultaneous to JFK's assassination. So that's the important context. And you can see we got this far into this second article and we have pages ahead. So I'm just going to get right into it and we're going to start talking about what in the world was going on the day that JFK was assassinated. The curious world which the Baker scandal has brought under a spotlight extended well beyond the circumscribed sphere of government and politics. Just outside, and consumed by an avid interest in both government and politics, is a special purpose Washington population known by the generic name of lobbyist. Lobbying, that is, attempting to sway government action in one way or another, is perfectly legal. It may also be useful and valuable as a source of specialized information, or it can be sinister and a breeder of corruption. In any case, the machinery of government has long carried around as an extra burden, like parasite remora fish suction cupped to a shark, a horde of enterprising persuaders representing interests eager to do business with the government or whose prosperity depends on favorable decisions of government. They are there to ensure, if they can, that the decisions go their way. Yes, they're nonstop lobbyists. It's interesting the way that they are just informing the public of this at this time, 1963, that this is something that I teach high school government. And this is something they learn probably on our second vocabulary quiz. It's a term that we all know now, but apparently not so in 1963. On the highest level, the lobbyist may have a good argument for his cause, a potential sound benefit to the country. On another, he may have campaign money to offer or withhold, or he may command political interest in a strategic quarter. On a more personal level, his stock in trade may consist of gaudy entertainment or the temptations of ringside participation in profitable commerce. Wow, I don't think that they would say this so explicitly now, that a lobbyist tries to get people to do things with money, political influence, gaudy entertainment, and the temptation of ringside participation in profitable business. Now we ask questions, somewhat facetiously, but I've heard more and more people calling attention to the idea that, hey, this government official makes below $200,000 a year. How do they have a $19 million savings account? Why are they worth that much? How can they possibly be worth $19 million if all they've made is $200,000 a year and it's crazy expensive to live in D.C. and plus you have to keep up 2 homes? And how in the world have you done that? Who can do that? But here it's very plainly said, isn't it? Bobby Jean Baker, by definition, was not a lobbyist himself, but he knew many who were, was a familiar figure among them, had social relationships with some, both business and social ties to others, and one particular lure for their circle. His unique influence on Capitol Hill put him in a position to assist the mutual interests of friends or associates. Perhaps because their attention focuses pretty much on the same target, the lobbyists tend to be a clubby lot. They gather in clusters here and there within striking distance of the Capitol. Here is a photo of him wheeling and dealing there. Baker was the creative genius behind one favored lobbyist hive, the lately spotlighted Quorum Club, which occupies a cozy second-floor retreat in the Carroll Arms Hotel just across the street from the new Senate office building. The Quorum Club, whose charter dictates its intent to be literary purposes, mutual improvement, and the promotion of social intercourse, was put together in 1961 with Baker as its organizer, charter keyholder number 3, and at one time an officer. Except for 2 generals, 2 admirals, 1 Navy captain, 4 Democratic senators, which included Brewster, Church, Edmondson, and Williams, 2 Republican congressmen, Ayers and Batten, and a sprinkling of other types, including the ambassador of Peru, most of the 197 current members are either lobbyists or businessmen. So this is a club, like an actual club that you pay for membership in, not a club that you just visit. This is saying there are these members, and it just listed them out. Baker was not only a charter member of the Q, he also had valuable contacts among the membership. One was Edward Bostick, president of the Melpar Corporation of Falls Church, Virginia, a maker of aerospace components, who recently acknowledged that he once agreed to a request from Baker, as a friend of mine for years, to accept a special bidder for the lucrative vending machine business in his plant. That came up in the previous reading. The club roster also includes at least 5 representatives of various savings and loan associations and 1 spokesman for the Tennessee Gas Transmission Company. Recent disclosures have indicated that from 1960 on, Baker has profited hugely from an enterprise in which savings and loan groups also have an interest. Not long ago, Baker moved his family into an $124,500 house. which now sounds like a steal, but back then that was a heap of money, perhaps 100 times the average cost of a home. Maybe not quite 100. We're talking about a huge step up from what anybody with normal means could afford. And it was within hallowing distance of millionaire Lyndon Johnson's own mansion, which was once owned by Tennessee Gas Transmission and is now held in trust by Ernest C. Tucker, a Baker intimate and associate in a law firm, under circumstances which Tucker has refused to discuss. Tucker, too, was a member of the Q Club. Here we have Baker's former secretary. It says she happily posed for the camera, but would not discuss his business goings-on. They also have a cute little Campbell's ad. I always like to show you guys the cute ads. That one's particularly sweet, quaint, like the ingredients going into your soups. Until the scandal spread out of the pyramided accumulation of Baker's moonlighting activities, his private law practice, conducted in offices shared with Tucker and others at 2000 P Street Northwest, seems not to have been common knowledge on Capitol Hill. A Western Democratic senator, not an intimate of the establishment, was wryly amused at the news. "I'm not surprised he was in business for himself," he said, "but I always had an idea that practicing private law on the side was a prerogative for senators only, and not for the hired hands." Baker had close social contacts in the Q, some tinctured with business. So it's saying there in that last bit that he's connected financially, geographically. Now we're being told he practiced law alongside the lobbying and wheeling and dealing. Among his business contacts were Scott I. Peake, who was administrative assistant to Senator George Smathers until last August. Smathers had a connection with the Kennedys. Smathers went boating in the Mediterranean with JFK, and it bugged Jackie, so he was connected to Kennedy. Glenn Troop, and he was a known womanizer. Glenn Troop, lobbyist for the U.S. Savings and Loan League, and Thomas D. Webb, Jr., who represents the Washington interests of Texas millionaire Clint Murchison, Jr. Okay, it's troubling to read this name because the only place that I have ever encountered the name Clint Murchison, Jr. is in regard to the JFK assassination. There was a meeting at his apartment, is my understanding, the night before the assassination. So basically, the night before this actually became public, Life magazine, connecting LBJ, Bobby Baker, and now Clint Murchison, they had a meeting that included multiple unsavory characters, and I believe it was at Murchison's apartment, and in fact, that's the place where allegedly LBJ told his mistress, "The Kennedys won't be a problem for me for long. You can take that to the bank." That was his rough quote. Okay, it's wild to read that particular name. So that was one of the other close social contacts in the Q, is Texas millionaire Clint Murchison, his associate in Washington, Thomas D. Webb, Jr., who represents Clint Murchison. That's who was the member of Q Club. Possibly through Webb, Baker also became friends with a non-resident Q member, Bedford S. Wynne of Dallas, W-Y-N-N-E is how that's spelled. This is Murchison's partner in ownership of the Dallas Cowboys, a professional football team, and with Murchison himself. From time to time, Baker has been prominent guest at Murchison's business social affairs, particularly one whiz-bang party at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach. With Webb acting as a host, he has also been entertained on excursions to one Murchison Palace on Spanish Cay in the Bahamas, and also in the Thousand Islands on the St. Lawrence River. On these occasions of lavish hospitality, Baker was generally accompanied by his wife Dorothy, often with friends, including the Troops, Peakes, and Tuckers. But in the peculiar Washington world here under review, wives were not the only women included in social activity. This may have been because simple congeniality often carried the burdens of business. The lines between having fun and furthering important actions were often hard to draw. This is a man's town, a transient town. It isn't run the way wives would probably prefer to run it, is what one habitue of Capitol Hill observed recently. He went on, it's also an action town. Big men, big politics, big money, big egos coming and going, out to make a deal or persuade somebody else to make one, stop a law or try to rig one. It's a social town, lots of parties, and probably more than half the parties are more than half business. No party was ever spoiled by having pretty girls around, and damn few deals ever suffered from having pleasant company for the dealers. And something else. I know girls are not a new invention, but it's surprising how many guys act as though they had just found out. The discovery tends to improve their dispositions. This is so antiquated, isn't it? The view of women. It is not hard to imagine that in this context, they would say things like the boiler room girls, that there were these women who were held supposedly in completely different regard than these people who are just companions for the people who are making wheels, who are wheeling and dealing. This being the case, the entry of girls into the saga of Bobby Baker's world was inevitable. Two girls, both government employees who figure prominently in the Baker story, are his secretary, Nancy Carroll Tyler, and her friend and one-time roommate, Mary Alice Martin, a former secretary in the office of Senator Smathers. Miss Martin has since left Washington to work in a Miami public relations firm, recently established by Baker's friend, Scott Peake. But curiosity about the girls arose because of the circumstances under which the shapely and pretty 24-year-old Carol Tyler and Mary Alice Martin shared living quarters. These were, and now we're going to go ahead to the other pages in this article. These were sufficiently unusual to send numerous eyebrows scooting skyward. We have backdrop for big deals, dances in harem pants, nude baths in champagne. The Mrs. Tyler and Martin were housed in a new $28,000 townhouse, a sort of glorified 3-level Quonset hut, in a slum clearance development called River Park Mutual Homes. Baker was the owner of record. On October 29, 1962, he signed an application to obtain the 4-bedroom house at an initial cost of $1,600 and a monthly carrying charge of $235. He listed the intended residence as M.A. Martin, no relation, and N.C. Tyler, a cousin. No recorded testimony reveals what impelled Bobby to confer cousinship upon Carol. Okay, so they are just listed as cousins, but there's no record, I think is being implied. Let's see. Washington busybodies tend to regard Baker's purchase of the house as an unusual act of solicitude for the comfort of a secretary. The girls' neighbors recall that Carol and Mary Alice entertained frequently and appeared to be popular hostesses to a wide variety of guests, ranging from young contemporaries to business executives to a professor visiting town from Carol's former college. But many other girls played many other roles in the world where Bobby Baker and his cohorts were familiars. Washington enjoys the pleasant advantage of being plentifully stockpiled with girls. The term girls is getting a bit thin already, isn't it? These are clearly women being used as secretaries and, consorts. Are we going to call them? What are we calling them here? Flowing into and out of myriad government offices, young single women outnumber everybody else. In this atmosphere, an attractive girl can lead an active social life despite the population imbalance of males, either suitable or capturable for wedlock. Just how active depends on the girl. She can confine it to the decorous role of embellishing numerous parties, it can lead her into an irregular but relatively stable liaison with a single admirer. If she's a swinger, as the term is used locally, it may take her on weekends to such glamorous pleasure domes as Bimini, San Juan, Miami Beach, New Orleans, or the bullfights in Mexico City. She may find herself practicing part or full-time prostitution. This is so scandalous and shocking. And here on this page, I just want to show you, down at the bottom, they have the various people right here listed out. The president of a corporation, the widow of Baker's partner, Washington representative for Murchison, the Texas businessman we were talking about, Senator Smathers' former assistant who's now giving jobs to various girls, Bobby Baker's law associate, and then Senator George Smathers. So these are the people being named on the same page with harem pants, nude baths, and women practicing part or full-time prostitution. It's like a tinderbox, isn't it? Do you feel that tension of like, this would not normally be published? This would not normally be called out. One way or another, young women become more or less legal tender in ancient and crafty commerce of getting things done. Thus, although the mere mention of it does seem to petrify some Washington sophisticates, it does not appear to surprise them that the rustle of skirts, sometimes in the process of being taken off, echoes as a faint silken obligato to the uproar over Bobby Baker. Such girls appear mainly as companions or adjuncts of the art of lobbying. Thus, one way and another, they also appeared in Bobby Baker's political, social, and business orbits. Some knew him. Some had been at parties where he was a guest. Some were frequent guests at the Q Club. At the extreme of all this social whirl were professional call girls. Their role acquires importance because they appeared not merely as toys, but as chattels employed to effect great decisions. One 30-ish call girl, who will be known here as Miss A, recalled that she once attended a business social dinner party at Aldo's restaurant, one of the group's, so group is capitalized, one of the group's favorite watering holes. Among those present, she said, were Thomas Webb, that's Murchison's lawyer or contact, Bedford Wynn of the Q Club. Bedford Wynn is the owner of the Dallas Cowboys. Other businessmen and female companions, and Bobby Baker and Carol Tyler. Bobby Baker, the object of this article, and Carol Tyler was his pictured secretary that we just saw. She, talking about Miss A, had met Baker through a mutual friend and had known him for about 8 years. So they're getting this information directly from her. Despite the length of their acquaintance, she had not learned to admire him. Quote, "I've known gangsters. And the difference between Baker and professional hoodlums," she said, "is that Baker's kind operates with a hunting license." Oof. Besides, the hoodlums are nicer. Baker is the kind of guy who would be friendly one time, and the next time you saw him in different company, you would think he didn't even know you. Another professional, herein identified as Miss B, mused over her curious acquaintance with a key executive of a defense contractor who also had social and business relationships with Baker. Miss B is now 20 and claims that her profession ordinarily brings in $800 a week, upon which, quote, "I pay my taxes." Lately, the Baker outcry has rendered her clients so timorous that her income has fallen sharply and may force her to delay plans for early retirement. Miss B said that she has known the defense executive for some time and, quote, likes him very much. Now and then she met him at the Q Club. At one meeting there, they were accompanied by a lobbyist friend of Baker's and a Midwest congressman who, quote, got drunk out of his head, end quote. She was aware that the executive was married and had children, she said, but he also kept a city apartment where her function, more or less, was that of hostess and entertainer. In fact, she kept a tambourine and harem pants on the premises as a costume for the Oriental dances she sometimes performed to regale the executive's guests. Sometimes she did other dances which required no costume whatever. Yeah, I bet she did. Once, perhaps because it was a hot summer night, the idea caught on, and the other girl guests either decided independently or were persuaded to peel as well. That time, the girls grew playful and finished the party pouring champagne over one another in the bathtub. Because she left early, she remembered with some regret, Miss B did not witness an odd incident in the dead of night. 3 girls, still rosy from their champagne bath, but drowsy too, elected to sleep together. But one woke up and in an unaccountable fit of annoyance, bit an exposed portion of another's anatomy. Ew, why are we telling about this? Victim of the chomp was Mrs. Ellen Ramich, 27-year-old wife of a soldier assigned to the West German military mission. She recently acquired belated fame after being forcibly detached from the Washington scene last August 21st. Prior to her departure, Mrs. Ramich apparently held social converse of one sort or another with several of Baker's friends, or their friends. Mrs. Ramich was sometimes a guest at the Q Club and visited Carol Tyler's home. Mrs. Ramich was often invited to social functions where members of the group were present, partly because she was handsome and partly, as has been reported, because she would do anything. Other acquaintances have described Mrs. Ramich as quiet and refined. The description may well be accurate, for on the night in question, she apparently bore her wound with fortitude and no ill will. Indeed, so they're calling names on this absurd situation after champagne has been poured in the bath. They're sleeping apparently in the nude, and then an exposed part is being chomped. And they're naming the person who got chomped, which is the wife of a soldier who had been assigned in West Germany. Indeed, when Dawn disclosed that another all-nighter's shoes were missing and her cocktail dress grievously torn, Mrs. Ramich arranged emergency attire. This costume consisted of a spare pair of the host's pants and a sweater and shoes lent by Mrs. Ramich. Thereafter, Mrs. Ramich generously waited until just before she was ordered home by the West German government to send her husband to reclaim the borrowed apparel. Miss B recalled that the executive's guests, whose morale she helped sustain at a high pitch of euphoria, were a mixed lot. But some were considerable personages of the U.S., susceptible to entertainment, but possibly also susceptible to the vulnerability of uneasy consciences later. They included an admiral and a general and a figure high in the executive echelons of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. Others included the representative of a major Texas defense contractor and a number of smaller fry among the fried. The executive appears to have been an energetic type with diverse enthusiasms. Another girl, who shall be known as Miss C, we wonder how far in the alphabet they're going to get now, also met him through a friend of a friend along in June this year. Miss C, who is also 20, claims no such munificent income as Miss B, but says she tries to keep her fees at a status level, quote, as high as possible, in the $50 to $100 range. Miss C also attends parties in the executive's apartment and found them enjoyable and diverting. He, in turn, must have been gratified by her company because a couple of days after one party, he sent Miss C a dozen roses. Miss C also recalled having several appointments with a man who has had business dealings with Baker, and she recalled that once, while visiting the man in a hotel, she met one of Baker's closest associates. Girls, a former Baker business associate said, were often around as business adjuncts. As he put it, in describing one planning session which he attended, Again, so help me, even to talk business, they had a bunch of girls who, they say, work in the government, and during their lunch hour, they make a little extra money. Money, of course, lies close to the many hearts, but to the heart of Bobby Jean Baker, it was a ruling passion. It made the pride of Pickens, South Carolina, a scattergun entrepreneur with an undiscriminating yen for nearly any kind of deal, big, little, sound, or unsound. Nobody has charged that Bobby committed a crime in his sprint after wealth. The only formal charge against him is a civil suit seeking $300,000 in damages. It does not seem likely that the present Senate Rules Committee inquiry into his activities will fetch much significant action. The Senate, which is sometimes savagely critical of misdemeanors in other arms of government, has a reputation for being aloof, introverted, and self-protective where its own are concerned. I believe they're talking about the investigation that LBJ called off once he was president. It is reported that the committee already has decided on ground rules for its closed-door probe, which specifically preclude condemnation of Baker's business operations as such and bar the private affairs of senators or their staffs as fit subjects for the agenda. But whether or not the senators ever move themselves to do something substantial about their strayed lamb, they can scarcely avoid stumbling upon Baker's amazingly diverse fiscal adventures. That's actually the little subtitle of this page, an amazing diversity of fiscal adventures. Although his interests reportedly enabled Baker to moonlight a fortune estimated as high as $2 million, his ventures seem less important in themselves than for what they reveal of the moral and ethical climate and commercial practices of modern official Washington and its unofficial satellites. Again, it's not an exact one-to-one, but I'm just multiplying numbers by 100 to get a rough estimate of the value. So a $2 million fortune then becomes more like a $200 million fortune today. Serious money. Serious money. In his major business activities, Baker was never entirely alone. Some sort of partnership or community of interest was always apparent, although perhaps because of an instinct for protective coloration, actual links among the varying beneficiaries could sometimes be deduced only from the hypothesis that people interested in the same thing are likely to be interested in one another. Among the most intriguing of Baker's involvements is that with Las Vegas gambler Edward Levison, and Cliff Jones, the former lieutenant governor of Nevada, who became associated with the pre-Castro gambling business at the Hotel Nacional in Havana, Cuba. Baker's tracks have shown up in Las Vegas, New York, and Santo Domingo as part of his efforts to secure for a Las Vegas group the gambling casino concessions in hotels in the Dominican Republic and Curacao, operated by a Pan-American Airways subsidiary. So on this page, I already see a lot of numbers, a lot of names. So I'm going to try to, encapsulate each one. But here we're talking about a connection of businesses associated with a Las Vegas gambling connection. Between March 29th and June 9th this year, while he was still majority secretary, Baker made 4 trips to the Dominican Republic. On April 16th, he registered in the El Embajador Hotel, sharing suites with Levison and one Jack Cooper of Miami, a well-known gambling figure of the Trujillo era. Baker's on-the-record financial operations have included a travel bureau in Washington, a credit bureau, a North Carolina motel in which Luther Hodges had a $58,000 interest before becoming Secretary of Commerce, cemetery promotion and land development schemes in South Carolina, a real estate venture in Jacksonville Beach, Florida, where 7 members of a syndicate put up a mere $540 each and borrowed a whopping $105,000 from Jimmy Hoffa's Teamsters to promote a motel and shopping center that has never been built, and an insurance brokerage in Silver Spring, Maryland. So we're talking about large amounts of money, large amounts of profit, where people are getting in, sometimes with small amounts of money, into the deal, borrowing money from major figures like Jimmy Hoffa, and that sometimes the deals come to nothing. So the money is coming in, money is exchanging hands at wild rates, and sometimes coming to nothing, sometimes coming to actual businesses. Considering the dimensions of some Baker enterprises, the insurance venture ranks as an ironic joke. Though he was made vice president when the firm was incorporated in 1955, Baker did not have the $250 needed as his share of charter capital. With his friend Scott Peake, former aide to Senator Smathers, he has shared in a joint business venture apparently controlled by the senator. From time to time, he would receive a memo from Smathers' office reporting on the proceeds from his 1/5 share in the enterprise, which brought him an income of around $5,000 a year. One such Smathers memo, sent to Baker and Peake, addressed them as dear tycoons. Okay, $5,000 a year. Again, that's like $500,000 a year now. It's a big amount of money. $1,600 was enough to buy that house for that one cousin. So $5,000 a year is not what we think of now. We're talking about basically $500,000 or something like that. Baker's enterprises indeed have not stopped at the continental limits. Since early 1961, he has been receiving commissions from the Haitian American Meat and Provision Company as a recompense for helping to arrange a permit for the company to export meat from Haiti to Puerto Rico and the U.S. Baker evidently got into the matter through the Borinquen Meat Packing Company of Puerto Rico, which wanted to import Haitian meat. For several years since, Baker has been paying income tax on about $6,000 a year, over $500,000 now, that he received from Borinquen as legal fees. The Haitian American company, which is still paying him commissions, has financial backing from the Murchison interests of Texas. Remember, every time we hear Murchison, we need to realize this is someone who, the night before this was printed, reportedly had a meeting about Kennedy in his apartment where LBJ was present. Okay. One or more of 4 cardinal characteristics have distinguished the largest of Baker's enterprises. So these are the characteristics. 1, a preference for using borrowed money rather than his own. So he doesn't even put up his own money. He borrows the money to put it up. Number 2, a tendency to do profitable businesses with firms which in turn depended on the government's patronage. 3, timely legislative or administrative government action when the enterprise needed it most. 4, conspicuous luck in making an obscure investment just before a favorable government ruling was to make it enormously profitable. That's like insider trading, right? That's what people have accused Nancy Pelosi of doing, that she somehow has a killer stock portfolio where she has invested in things right before they go through the roof, right before some government thing happens that makes them exceedingly profitable. That's what he was doing with his businesses. Baker's present predicament stems directly from his involvement in the vending machine business, and in addition entangles him with 2 Q Club members, Edward Bostick, president of Melpar Corporation, a firm that manufactures printed circuits for the Minuteman missile, and one Fred Black, a Washington lobbyist and consultant to North American Aviation Corps. The $300,000 civil suit, which now would be $30 million, which precipitated the Baker outcry, was brought by, quote, an old friend from Capitol Hill, one Ralph Hill, head of Capitol Vending. Hill alleges that Baker first intervened with Bostick, a government contractor, to expel another vending machine concessionaire from Melpar in favor of Hill's own company. After Baker thus helped him, Hill asserts, he paid the majority secretary $5,600. So again, that's like $500,000 now. So we're talking about huge amounts of money exchanging hands. But thereafter, Hill charges, Baker and Black together did an about-face and influenced Bostick to toss Capitol Vending out of Melpar after Hill resisted their pressure to sell out to still another new vending company, Serve You Corps. Whatever the rights or wrongs of Hill's suit, Baker's connection with Serve You is tantalizing, and Serve You itself is a hyperthyroid phenomenon in the vending industry. Now only 2 years old, Serve You is already doing a business of $3.5 million a year in California alone. So we're talking about $305 million in a business that Baker's connection is with in California, entirely in plants doing government work. So we're talking about a vending contract in government plants. In January 1962, Serve You was chartered to do business in California. In February, North American Aviation displaced a veteran vending concessionaire to let Serve You take over its business of 15,000 employees in its headquarters. In August, North American granted Servue the vending concession in its space division. In November, Servue was granted the vending contract at Northrop Corporation's Ventura division. In February 1963, Servue got the vending account at Northrop's Systems Support division, Anaheim, California. In June, Servue took over the vending business in the Space Technical Laboratories of Thomson-Ramo Woolridge at Redondo Beach, California. In October, North American gave Servue the vending account of its Rocketdyne division. Okay, so we're talking about the rapid recontracting of a very profitable business by government plants, month over month over month. So it's as if money is just being thrown in the direction of this business, Servue. And they're saying Bobby Baker is affiliated, but we're about to learn what his role is. It says Baker himself has never appeared as a stockholder or officer of Servue. However, Baker's law associate, Ernest Tucker, has at times been listed as director, vice president, secretary, and chairman of the board. This company is not that old, but they are moving this guy around. They're dancing. Tucker's wife, Lorraine, has been listed as an assistant secretary. Baker's younger brother, Charles, has been described as an officer. Baker's wife, Dorothy, has signed herself as assistant secretary. And in one transaction, Baker himself co-signed for a $746,000 loan borrowed by the corporation. If Baker does not have an interest in Servue, he is certainly no stranger to its operations. Okay, so he's been involved in this corporation that has just had nonstop government contract work thrown at it. And we're talking about massive amounts of money, hundreds of millions of dollars. Like Mary's tag-along lamb, Servue seems to have had a habit of showing up wherever Bobby did. In 1961, Baker persuaded an old friend, Alfred Novak, and his wife, Gertrude, and Novak's brother, Donald, to join him in a project to build a luxurious motel, the lately much publicized Carousel, at Ocean City, Maryland, a resort 140 miles from Washington. Almost before they knew it, the Novaks found themselves tied up in a scary three-way partnership which had $75,000 invested in real estate and its name on some of the $584,000 in mortgages and notes. But as they built, Baker's notions kept expanding. He wanted to add a restaurant and a flossy nightclub. But Alfred Novak, a Maryland home builder and a conservative man, was afraid of losing his shirt and began fretting. On the morning of March 3rd, 1962, Mrs. Novak found him dead in the garage, the car engine running, and the door open only a few inches. On the day of Novak's funeral, Mrs. Novak recalled recently, Baker came to her house with law associate Ernest Tucker and carried away all the motel accounts. Then, at Baker's suggestion, she accepted Tucker as her lawyer for the estate. He was also attorney for the Carousel, which finally opened on July 22, 1962, with Hollywood hoopla and Vice President Johnson as a guest of honor. But somehow things never did go right for the Carousel. Bills kept piling up, and the place had 8 managers in 7 months. During this distressing period, Baker proposed a measure to lighten the Carousel's burdens and recover part of their investment. The idea was to turn the motel into a cooperative and sell some of its units outright. Alabama's Senator John Sparkman has recently acknowledged that he introduced an amendment into the 1962 tax law, which provided that owners of units in a cooperative who rented the units to others could claim a tax deduction for depreciation. You see how they're doing this. So they are deliberately finding a guy who will hold an amendment to a bill and insert that to get the exact particular financial arrangement that they wish to have for their own profits. The amendment, which passed without demur, could have rendered the purchase of Carousel units more attractive to potential buyers because they can depreciate the value. After passage of the measure, Senator Sparkman said he learned that it was known as, quote, the Bobby Baker Amendment, end quote. But Baker apparently gave up on the cooperative idea, and in January this year, Baker told Mrs. Novak that he had a buyer who would assume their liabilities and reimburse their own investment with promissory notes to be liquidated out of the motel's future receipts. And who should the buyer turn out to be? Serve you. Who else? However, when it came time for Mrs. Novak to accept $107,000 in non-negotiable, non-assignable notes, no cash, for her equity, she felt a sudden belated flash of unease. The notes were signed by Servue's chairman of the board, who, it developed, was none other than Ernest Tucker, who was also still Carousel's attorney, Baker's law associate, and the lawyer for her husband's estate. Mrs. Novak got another lawyer. Yeah, when your lawyer is the one financially benefiting from the sale of your most important financial investment, yeah, maybe get another lawyer. Although the Carousel venture turned out badly, the Novaks did enjoy the good luck to get a piece of what appeared to have been the major wellspring of Bobby Baker's fortune. It happened that Baker's wife Dorothy gave birth to their fourth child, a daughter, early in February 1960. As close friends, the Novaks went to visit one night, and having congratulated the parents and viewed the baby, turned shortly to a subject that absorbed them all. We were chatting, as usual, about our investments, Mrs. Novak recalled recently. We always talked about either some stock or properties of some sort. Mr. Baker said he knew of a stock that was to be probably pretty good. He said if he was able to get this stock, that he presently did not have any money himself, but if we would get it, he would share it, the profits, 50-50 with us. The Novaks believed in Bobby. They put up $11,772 to buy 3,600 shares of the common stock of the Mortgage Guarantee Insurance Corporation of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, at $3 a share. Subsequently, before and after Novak's death, the stock was sold in 4 lots and brought in a total of $87,399, a profit of $75,627 over the Novaks' investment. So they put up what is effectively $100,000, and they get back effectively $700,000 in profit. Baker took half. He had contributed nothing except his confidence that the mortgage guarantee would go up. He must have been confident, indeed, for recent testimony leaking out of the Senate Rules Committee indicates that in one arrangement or another, his own holdings in Mortgage Guarantee, or MAGIC, as it is now sometimes aptly called, totaled 16,567 shares in 1962. At last year's average prices for the stock, these holdings would have been worth in the neighborhood of $495,000. So that's the effective quantity of $50 million in this stock. This guy is a total wheeler and dealer in all sorts of areas. He's a wheeler and dealer in persons as well. He's clearly able to influence and impact these people. Oh, wow. We have on the sides, we have an upset stomach advertisement for Alka-Seltzer here. And we have rolling seat belts being advertised. Last week, Max Carl, who established Mortgage Guarantee in 1957, reported that Baker bought his own stock in the company in 1959. So he owned the stock, was giving people, tips to raise the stock, but he was holding his own stock. This was substantially before Baker touted the Novaks into a profitable partnership in the stock. The Novak purchase was made on February 8th, 1960, which, however, was still a full 17 days before the firm's first legal public stock offering was authorized by the SEC. So he already owned stock. Right before it goes public, he gives people tips so that it can go up. So he's personally rigging the stock market. He's personally making his own holdings more profitable. The question remains, whence came Baker's inspiration to bet the Novaks' money on Magic's future? Mortgage Guarantee, organized in Milwaukee, was a private FHA and the only one of its kind, and had a rather dismal youth. It lost $63,000 in its first year, another $7,500 in 1958. It turned only a modest profit in 1959, the year that Max Carl has said that Baker bought his stock. But also in 1959, in May and again in July, Magic asked the U.S. Treasury Department for a private tax ruling, which would exempt half of its premium payments from income tax for 15 years. Both times the request was denied, but then in December 1959, Magic's backers went to Republican Representative John Burns of Wisconsin and asked him to sponsor legislation to grant them the favorable tax rating. Burns prepared the bill, but in January 1960 was advised by the Joint Committee on Internal Revenue Taxation that Magic could probably force a favorable tax ruling if it chose simply to test its case in court. In March of that year, as sometimes happens in the face of legislative pressure, the Treasury Department reversed itself and gave Magic what it wanted. In 1960, Magic, the one-time fiscal cripple, made a profit of $234,000, and it has been zooming ever since. Its 1962 profit was up to $974,000, which is like $97 million of profit. So it went from losing $63,000, losing $7,500, barely turning a profit, to the next year having a profit of $234,000 and then $974,000 profit. Crazy profits. And this year looks even better. Representative Burns, despite his connection with the legislation, got into Magic far later than Baker. Even so, stock for which the Wisconsin congressman paid $2,300 in September 1960 is now valued about 10 times that figure. For the Senate investigators, if they get around to looking, there remains that metaphysical question: how did Bobby Baker come by his lucky hunch about 10 months sooner than Congressman Burns? Might his interest have been aroused through the savings and loan representatives among the Quorum Club members, possibly his friend Glenn Troop? Whatever the case, it is demonstrable that the savings and loan industry has a special interest in the affairs of Magic. In 1963, Magic's board of directors included 8 savings and loan executives, including chairman of the board. As the Senate proceeds with its investigation, there appears to be a continuing indisposition to find out. Within the Rules Committee, as it pored over Baker's affairs, Senator Howard Cannon of Nevada may have been voicing the temperament of modern Washington as he protested, "There's nothing illegal about making an investment like that." In a similar light, it may be useful to note the observation of one of Baker's longtime acquaintances. You take a hungry kid from the hills of South Carolina and expose him to this big political conduit streaming with dough? And hell, what would you expect? But Baker's weakness was, once he had it made, just having it wasn't enough. It was compulsive. He wanted you to know he had it, which is the little headline there. Fatal mistake. He flaunted his success. In the end, as Baker's cynical world views the scandal, that was Bobby's only mistake. I believe that's the end of the article. I'm going to verify that. Yeah, we move on. I mean, there are fascinating articles even in this one. It says, racial collision in the big cities. The Negro-white problem is greatest in the North, where the Negro is taking over the cities and being strangled by them. And they have these 2 little adorable kids going to school. Don't they look so pulled together? Kids never look that pulled together now when they're on their way to school. Those little children look adorable. Well, that is fascinating. So Bobby Baker, right at the time of the JFK assassination, close associate with LBJ. And if you missed that first episode, you want to go back because that's where they really chronicle the close relationship between Bobby Baker and LBJ. We only saw their close relationship here in the way that LBJ was the guest of honor the night of its opening of that Carousel Motel. But, wow. That's a lot of connections. I hope it made sense to you guys. I hope you understood more about the business dealings of this man, Bobby Baker, and his connection with LBJ. And yeah, the fact that all of this was coming out on the day that JFK was assassinated. Well, that's a lot to take in, isn't it? So much in this one printing of life. And there's more here too, but that was the part of the Bobby Baker episode, the Bobby Baker scandal. So let me know what you think in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Do you believe there's an LBJ connection to the JFK assassination, and to what degree? Do you think he had just kind of given his affirmation that he'd be amenable to it? Do you think he actually gave the nod and planned the thing? Remember that quote from the LBJ mistress that she claims that he said, you know, that the Kennedy boys wouldn't be a problem for him after today. So I don't know. Anyway, lots to think about, lots to ponder, and so much scandal printed in black and white. It's a little hard to believe, I think. So anyway, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. I hope you have a great day, and this gives you lots to think about. Bye.